Sweet. That's the one. So yeah, so really good to have some good conversations about them, some really good values coming through and ideas. And so like Sean said, the final piece of content that we wanted to cover today was the idea of how the type of relationships coaches have with their athletes can play a significant impact on their well-being. So throughout this research that I'm about to present, I want you to keep an eye out on some overlap of what we've just discussed in both topics previously, because there is quite a significant link between, especially the last topic that we just talked about. So again, this content's based on a piece of research, this time out of Norway, by a man named Frode Moen. I usually get that name wrong, but yeah, we'll go with that one. And Norway tends to be quite a good country of comparison for New Zealand due to the similarities in population and land size, etc. And with this study, they focused on 36 coaches and their opinions of how they impact the achievement process of athletes in terms of relational issues like we've just discussed with Sean, such as motivation, responsibility, and development. So throughout the research, they have a focus on, again, the word effective, and this time an effective relationship, with ties again to values and ingredients, just like we've just mentioned. And the effective values that they talk about come in the form of empathic understanding, cooperation, positive regard, just to name a few. They had a big list of values there. Whereas the ineffective values that they talk about are centered around lack of interest and negative emotion. And the first main part of this research was highlighted by Frode in the term of the 3 C's. And these were set out as the 3 key ingredients for coaches to create an effective relationship. So these 3 C's are, as you can see on the screen, the first one being closeness, which is the depth of the emotional attachment between a coach and their athlete. And the next one's commitment. And this is the desire or intention that the coaches and athletes have for maintaining their relationship over time. And the last one is complementarity, which is how cooperative and effective the relationship is. This is the degree in which both the coach and the athlete benefit from the relationship. So these 3 C's are 3 key ingredients for coaches to monitor within their relationship with their athletes. And from the values that we've just discussed prior, you can start to link them to each of the 3 C's and which category they'd fall into. And an effective relationship is said to have high values in each of these 3 ingredients. So the next point that we want to discuss is the different types of relationships that we might already be involved with or that we want to potentially shift towards. So there are 3 main types of relationships within sport, within coaches and athletes. And the first one is dependency. And this is where there's a reliance of the athlete on a more knowledgeable and experienced other. And for this to work, there must be a clear idea of what the athlete requires help with, and then the help that is provided by that more knowledgeable other is needed and useful. The next relationship we have is an independency relationship. So this is the polar opposite of a dependency relationship. And this is where the athlete establishes that they require no help, no assistance at all, and they do what they want when they want. And lastly, we have the mutuality relationship. And this one has the aim of promoting independence of both parties without provoking dependence. So this is a collaborative relationship with the mutual focus on improvement from both the coach and the athlete. As the coach, they provide help by reflecting on their own knowledge and experience to stimulate the athlete's thinking. And they, at times, both dependency and independency occur. So it is a bit of a mix between dependency and independency relationships. So those are the 3 types of relationships. So now I'm going to go over some of the key findings that I have found from this study. And the first one is that 34 out of the 36 coaches that were interviewed agreed that athletes should have contact with a helper, which ultimately established that that independency relationship wasn't particularly beneficial in most circumstances. And next, I found that the goals, needs, and wants have to be mutually recognized and agreed on between coach and the athlete. So there must be a common goal between coach and athlete, or athletes. Next, the coach plays a vital role in unlocking the athlete's potential. So through the aspect of discovery, with things such as reflection and questioning and guiding athletes in directions based off the coach's experience and knowledge, the athletes need to take responsibility for their learning, and therefore they learn even more. And the last 3 points I'm going to go over, in my biased opinion, are the most important points that I've taken from this study. And the first one is that active listening is key. So asking questions and answering questions must occur from both the coach and the athlete. So there must be clarifying and understanding of each other. And our athletes want to be truly heard in these discussions. And then next, for this to happen, the athletes need to be met with a respectful attitude. So our athletes require our full attention when we're in their company. We can't have the discussions that we're having with them going in one ear and out the other. And the last point is what I think is the most vital, and that is that communication is the single most important skill to have in an effective relationship. So ultimately, if there is great communication between coach and athlete, there will most likely be a collaborative relationship that is high in all values of the 3 C's. So to go back over the 3 C's quickly, to have a high level of closeness, coaches must have conversations with their athletes to establish an emotional connection. And this doesn't always have to be about sport. We can talk to them about things outside of the sporting world. For commitment, discussions must occur to establish how the relationship is going and what needs to occur to allow the relationship to keep progressing and keep going. And finally, complementarity. To both benefit from the relationship, the athlete and the coach must establish how they can help and benefit each other. And this can't happen without communication. So that is all the content from this piece of research. So again, I'm going to pass it back to Sean, who is going to set us up with our final question. So there you go.
Thank you, Brock, and appreciate everyone who's been chiming into the chat about the little values piece. So what we're going to do for this part is we're going to go real basic with the question. It's going to be one question, and I'm about to fire it into the chat. What does an effective coach-athlete relationship look like? The process will be the same as last time. Once you've finished your conversation, come back into the main room and join our discussion. So in your own time before we close out the session. But real basic, what does an effective coach-athlete relationship look like? There's still the odd people, drips and drabs, hanging out in the main room. Awesome, Brock. This is from my perspective, this is my favorite piece of research out of the two. And it's so the communication. We had this conversation the other day when people say communication, as being it's such an easy answer, isn't it, to say communication? But you gave some really good detail there about the importance and where and when and where it can be useful. So that was a right choice.
Yeah.
Steph, I'm going to fire to you really quickly here, because in this relationship, you're the athlete in the coach-athlete relationship. So tell me about what an effective coach-athlete relationship looks like from your perspective.
Yeah, so I know that we kind of were just talking about communication before, but definitely having the coach and the athlete on the same page. So my coach, what he does is we actually before the season starts, we'll sit down and we actually go over what the goals for the season are. And then we also go through that during the season, because quite often it can change depending on long distance running. You kind of have a few different events. And so depending on how your training's going, you might actually alter that and go for a different event. But you need to have that communication to do that. The other thing that I really like that you said, was the questioning and guiding. So something that my coach often does is he'll question how I'm feeling during that, how if my body was tired, and that kind of makes you stop and think, because you can be in that automatic phase where you just you're training, you don't realize that your body's going through that kind of a slump. And then from that would be the questioning of outside of sport, because it's not just sport, it's your sleep, your nutrition, and all of that sort of links in together. So definitely for me, it's the questioning and how you do that is kind of the big
Very
one.
cool. And I listened to a Sport New Zealand webinar last week, and they talked about a player or participant, athlete, whatever you want to call them, will want to know 3 things about a coach. Do they care? Can I trust them? And can they make me better? And the questions that they ask you there shows that they care straight away. And that's a great place to start, especially when we're referring to well-being. I love that. Brock, do you have any further thoughts?
I just had a question for Steph as well.
Yeah, love that. Go for it.
With that aspect of the questioning and stuff, going on the side of from your point of view, do you also ask questions, and do you feel like if you do you get the right kind of response and like body language and things like that from your coach?
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely will have to ask questions quite a bit, even just clarity on some of the training. And it's different now with COVID because obviously we can't train together. So you've got to be a lot more onto your questioning from an athlete side as well as the coach. But yeah, I definitely always get really good feedback from that. And sometimes we'll be questioning each other the whole time. So it's not just one-sided yet.
Nice. Thank you, Brock. We've got some people back. And Scott and Mary, I have every time we go into a breakout room, I give you someone else and they leave the meeting. It is honestly, I'm being royally stitched up here, Scott. It's not my fault.
Maybe it's the beard.
Maybe. But do you want to share your conversation that you had in your breakout room, Scott, around what does an effective coach-athlete relationship look like?
Yeah, sure. Me and Mary sort of had a chat around, well, it's a hard question to answer because we sort of spoke about that it depends on the athlete.
Very cool.
Depends on their circumstances. It depends on what both parties are trying to achieve. And I guess like we both sort of came to terms and agreed on the fact that, we want it to be open and both parties can be vulnerable and acknowledge that we're both learning. We're learning as coaches, but they're learning as players. So
very cool. Nice.
Concepts around that. Yeah.
And it's cool that you put context into it. And if you think right back to ecological systems, there's a link there, isn't it, around what is the environment that we're operating in? What are we trying to achieve? And all those questions are super important. I appreciate that. And sorry again, Mary and Scott, for the stitch up, it being just the two of you. Alia, welcome back. I know that you can talk for ages. So do you want to start us off, considering you're one of the first groups back? What does a coach, a good coach-athlete relationship look like?
Well, when we were in our little chat, Lucy made a really good point about it's one where there's good communication backwards and forwards between the gymnast and the athlete. And then we expanded on saying it also means that you can kind of see that their goals kind of align with each other. And we gave the example that if you've got a athlete whose goal is I want to represent international, or I want to do this amount of work, and you've got a coach who's like, well, I'm just turning up to just do the job and I don't really care, then their goals don't really align. And vice versa, if you've got a coach who's like, I want to coach this type of gymnast, and this is what I want to do, and then you've got a gymnast who it doesn't entirely agree with that, then what's going to happen when they have their coaching relationship? It's not going to match regardless of how hard they try, because they're not really aligning each other's goals.
Makes a lot of sense. Yep. Being on the same page, what are we trying to achieve, and communicating about that so that we are on the same page is valuable. Nice. Thank you, Ali. I appreciate that. I'm going to fly over to Adam. I'm going to go to a different sport. Volleyball. Come to the table if you want to turn your mic on, your camera on. It's your take from your breakout room about a positive coach-athlete relationship.
There's probably two biggies. I know for me, I deal across the spectrum in terms of the high-level end athletes versus, secondary school level. So a big thing for me is if I can go with my older ones and they'll text me and they'll be like, can we grab a beer? Can we catch up? And you just chat. And it doesn't actually have to be about the sport. Just talk about life, talk about everything in general. How's your girlfriend? How's your dog? How's the house? Is the mortgage being paid? And just get to know them on that point of view is like, you're basically a brother to them or a dad, that sort of thing. In their eyes, you're being a mentor. And then for the younger group, vulnerability, we discussed. Vulnerability is huge. So actually going out and training with them and making mistakes, because I think there's this big expectation that whoever a coach is that they're invincible and they're an Olympian themselves and everything. And there's a large majority of volunteers don't actually or haven't actually played the sport to a high level. So actually going out and being like, yeah, I made mistakes, and then laughing it off, and then just being like, getting on with it, and then them realizing, cool, sweet, I can do the same thing. It's just a game.
Very cool. I appreciate that. I'm just going to throw it out to the floor now. Does anyone want to just start chatting away? Put your mic on, camera on. If you want to use the little hand up gesture, and if I don't get anyone, that's when I'll start naming names. So
yeah, here from judo.
Thank you, Robert.
Might be oversimplifying it, but in terms of an effective coach-athlete relationship, I think if two things are happening, one is performance, so the performance is happening better than it would have done if the relationship doesn't exist, and the other one is if you're creating a better or a happier human being.
Very cool.
And I think if those two elements have been met, if it's better performance-wise and they're a better, happier person, and I say that as someone who's sort of lost an athlete on the way to the Commonwealth Games, if those two things are met, it's probably a decent coach-athlete relationship.
Very cool. Robert, I appreciate that. And I appreciate that you're out of breath because you've been on the rowing machine the entire time. So I'm very impressed. And I agree with you there. We talked in the main room, myself and Brock and Steph and Blake, we talked about thriving as the ability to perform well and feel good at the same time. And that's you've hit the nail on the head there. Appreciate that. And there's no such thing as being too simplified, because it's the best way to go about it. We've got most groups filtering back in. Before I handball directly to someone, does someone just want to share their insights and make a comment as to what a positive coach-athlete relationship looks like? Anyone else want to hand up, gesture, or just start firing away?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Appreciate that, David. Thank you, mate.
Got a good one. I'm David from Auckland Rugby League, but yeah, a lot of what came up in our room was enjoyment. So the coach and the athlete both enjoying themselves and not necessarily winning at all costs. Like there's a lot to be learned in failure, and we also agreed that's when the resilience comes in. The harder you fall, the quicker you can get back up, sort of. And when you say I can't do it, that just means you can't do it yet. You haven't figured out how to. One reference I always like to go back to is the relationship between Mike Tyson and his coach Cus D'Amato. Although he took him to become a world champion at such a young age, when Cus died, Mike Tyson was still winning, but he wasn't enjoying himself as a person, and he started getting into a bad way with a lot of people externally. So he started having like gambling addictions. He started hanging out with the wrong people, like Don King, who sold him short and all that stuff. Although he was still successful and mildly successful as an athlete, as a person, he started to fall off the rails a bit more, and he wasn't enjoying himself a bit more. And that comes down to him quitting midway in his last fight. So, yeah.
I appreciate that insight. It's great to share a story as well, David. Stories are really powerful. So thank you for giving that insight. I'm sure people will research up a little bit about that. Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in and share their thoughts? Similar thoughts to David, maybe down a different track, completely up to you.
Sean,
Yes, there's a few people. Kelly, go for it. You're going to go, and then I'm going to handball to you, Fendi. Sorry, you got cut off. Kelly.
Okay, we had some absolute gold from our group. I'm just going to go out there and
rattle it away.
So it was, who is this person and what do they need from me?
Oh,
really loved that one. It was like, done.
We can finish there. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, and that was Matt from gymnastics. And then Jess from water polo. A good relationship is where the athlete and the coach can both grow, having our learning environment, which we were like, yeah, sweet, done. That's another piece of gold. So, yeah, two great ones from our group.
Fantastic. And before I handball to you, Fendi, we talked about, if any of you joined in Sport New Zealand's webinar last week, they talked about a participant, player, athlete, whatever you want to call them, is looking for three things from their coach. Do they care? Can I trust them? And can they make me better? And those are three good questions. Fendi, yours.
Yeah, so just from our group, the two things that we think that makes an effective coach-athlete relationship is trust and boundaries. Like, can you trust the athlete? Can the athlete trust you as a coach? Can you trust each other to do the work that needs to happen for performance to, for them to grow and develop? And also setting boundaries, like when it comes to talking about things inside or outside the sport, where do we draw the line? But it's an ongoing thing that we have to continuously work on. It's always different with individuals as well, so it's not always the same.
Nice, appreciate that, Fendi, and that comes back to communication, doesn't it? That Brock highlighted. Parksy, I'm going to throw you under the bus, mate. The resident Australian, other than Brock, with us. If you're able to put your camera on and mic on, I want to share your thoughts.
Yeah, we discussed a lot of different things in our group. One of the interesting parts is I think it's becoming gaining a lot of popularity. And we had David in our group who's involved at the pointy end of an organisation, which has its own set of challenges in terms of how do you keep that alignment of those goals when you're teaching those values-based parts of our sport. So yeah, it was really interesting. So yeah, like there's clearly really good value in developing our kids as young humans. I think it's really nice to listen to everyone on here. They've got a really similar focus, is that they're humans first and then athletes second, and we want them to be the best human that they can be rather than the best athlete. And yeah, having a robust coach-athlete relationship is the key to that.
Very cool. I appreciate your thoughts from Western Australia. Thank you, mate.
Yes.
Anyone else want to chime in? We've got a couple of minutes before I close the loop on this little piece. If anyone else wants to share, they're more than welcome to.
I've just been writing a little essay that I was going to put in the chat. So if no one's
yeah, you close us, Brock. You close with some wisdom.
I was just thinking, with putting this all together, I've kind of pondered my experiences with coaching football in New Zealand and also hockey in the UK. That we tend to coach might be a little bit of a problem. We tend to coach one age group and not one team group of people in the junior levels specifically. So for when I've coached like under 9s, under 11s, etc., I've been able to create like that good relationship throughout a season, but then ultimately I lose them for the next season because they get older and they go to the next age group, and I get the next lot of under 9s or under 11s. And I've kind of thought that this impacts that second C of commitment. So for me, I think just thinking about all these ideas and things is a way that I can go to my future clubs and maybe think, okay, if I'm with the under 9s now, if we see real good development and improvement, etc., is there a way that I can then go with them to under 11 and under 13, etc.? But yeah, that's kind of like that's just I've been pondering that throughout putting this together, and yeah, thought I should just quickly share.
Great insight. And thank you as well for David for throwing his little piece into the chat as well. And if anyone else wants to throw something into the chat, they're welcome to. But from my end, we've come to the end of our little kōrero. So for your perspective, Parksy, kōrero is chat in Māori. So we've come to the end of that. I've got another poll for everyone. Just some feedback around, picked up some new knowledge, thoughts on the delivery style, which topic did you enjoy more? That'll be really useful. That'll be really useful from our perspective. I will then close with another karakia prior to just a last little thank you for your contributions and so forth. So I'll give you 30 seconds to do your bit with regards to the poll there, and then I'll close things out.